Now we're going to hear from Peter.
I'm going to focus my contribution on the use and abuse of the anti-terrorism and public order laws. I would estimate that these represent the greatest threat to civil liberties since the Second World War, and possibly even since the Napoleonic Wars. We have before us now a whole raft of anti-terror laws. One law piled on top of the other, more and more extreme each time. One of these laws is Section 44. In the period 2000 to 2007, 180,000 people were stopped under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act, resulting in a mere 255 arrests out of 180,000 stops. I was one of them. Why was I stopped and detained? It happened in Windsor on the day of the wedding of Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. I went there with my outraged colleagues to simply hold up a placard to draw attention to the then ban on same-sex marriage. The placard simply said, "Charles can marry twice. Gay people can't even marry once." For that, I was arrested and detained under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act. Here in Kent, gay and bisexual men have been detained under Section 44 by the Kent Constabulary for cruising in a forest in the middle of the night. Can you believe it? Consenting adults in a deserted forest in the middle of the night, arrested by Kent police under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act. There's also been many examples of photographers being arrested in the City of London for photographing buildings. They were doing a portfolio for an architecture exhibition. They were doing a project about business life in the city. And they were arrested and detained under Section 44. What I'm trying to suggest is that we have exceeded by far the duty and right to protect the public in a way that is excessive, that goes beyond what is necessary and what is obligatory for a government that is concerned to protect public safety. This year, as we know, we're celebrating the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. These laws are a direct subversion of it. For many, many years, we had anti-terror laws that allowed a person to be detained on mere suspicion of involvement with or support for terrorism. And they could be, for some years, detained without charge, with no time limit on their detention. Eventually, thankfully, the courts overturned that. And then the government introduced two new measures. One was control orders, which basically put people under house arrest indefinitely, and an asset freeze. Their assets were frozen. They could not spend money unless they had a court permission. Under control orders and the asset freeze, the victims were not allowed to know the evidence against them or to appeal in a court of law. This is all done by secret session. This is the armory of a totalitarian state, not a democracy. You're all aware of Britain's implication in extraordinary rendition and the subsequent torture of terror suspects. I emphasize suspects. not proven guilty men or women. Under extraordinary rendition, people were seized, were kidnapped, and taken to third countries where they were subjected to torture. And there is evidence that the British government was complicit in that we allowed some of these flights to land and refuel in our own country, and indeed on British territories like Diego Garcia. Moreover, under these anti-terrorism laws, people are detained on the most strange, odd, circumstantial evidence. I was involved in helping defend two Pakistani human rights defenders based here in London, Herbie Omari and Faiz Baluch. When I attended the opening of their first court appearance, the prosecution evidence included things like they had multiple mobile phones, they had too many credit cards, they'd made frequent trips abroad. Now, where and how and why in a democracy should that be admissible evidence in a case of terrorism? In the end, there were entirely innocent, reasonable explanations for those three things. But those men eventually stood trial, and fortunately, only because they had the best lawyers in the land, and they were lucky to have an open-minded jury, were they acquitted. Under the anti-terrorism laws, we now have dozens of organisations that are banned. They are prescribed as illegal under the anti-terrorism laws, and it's unlawful for anybody to support them. It includes the Balochistan Liberation Army. I do not endorse the Balochistan Liberation Army, but it is fighting a war against the annexation of Balochistan by the Pakistan military and against horrendous human rights abuses that are happening there. The cold-blooded assassination and murder of not hundreds, but thousands of Baluch citizens who are resisting Pakistani occupation. And that has been corroborated by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Why should supporting an organisation that's fighting for freedom be a crime? Under these laws, if they existed many decades ago, it would have been unlawful for you or me to have supported the African National Congress of South Africa, because they were fighting a low-level civil war against the apartheid state. If we look at the anti-terrorism laws, the basis of them all is the Terrorism Act of 2000. It underpins all the subsequent legislation that has been passed. It defines terrorism as actions and even mere threats designed to influence governments for a political cause anywhere in the world. Now that is a draconian, sweeping definition of terrorism. Under that definition, when Greenpeace went into crop fields to destroy genetically modified crops because they felt it was a danger to public health, they could have technically been done under the Terrorism Act because they were engaged in what was regarded as damage to property and action that was designed to influence government for a political cause, namely the cessation of genetically modified crop trials. But it goes much wider. There are many, many restrictions on the right to protest under successive public order legislation. The most serious one, of course, is the 1986 Public Order Act, originally introduced to combat football hooliganism and street riots. But almost since the day of this legislation, it has been primarily used to suppress peaceful protests. Now, the right to protest has not been removed, but under this legislation and others, it has been progressively eroded. to the detriment of democracy and free speech. When my first campaigns were being undertaken in my youth, there were very few police powers to stop peaceful demonstrations. Now there are many, and they're enshrined in law. For example, you have to give the police advance notice now of protest marches, which they will normally agree, but not always, and they will have the power to dictate the route of the march and where you go. So, for example, when Formula One was planning to host the first ever Bahrain Grand Prix, myself and others wanted to protest against Formula One colluding with the tyranny in Bahrain. We wanted to protest outside Formula One headquarters. The police said, no, you must protest further away up the street, in a position where the people in the headquarters would not even see us. The police also have the summary power to dictate not only the location, but the duration of a demonstration, and to arbitrarily limit the number of protesters. So some years ago, when Nelson Mandela came to London to celebrate his 90th birthday at a concert in Hyde Park, together with Zimbabwean human rights activists, we had agreed in advance, foolishly, with the police that we would have a protest to appeal to President Mandela to speak out against the grotesque human rights abuses in Zimbabwe. We had an agreement. When we turned up, the police broke that agreement, moved us away from the location where Mandela was coming into the park, and then stood in front of us to block us being seen by Mandela as he arrived. The police also have the power to confiscate placards that could cause, quote, alarm or distress. Now, another example of this would be the case of anti-abortion protesters. I don't agree with them, but I defend their right to protest. Yet many of them have been arrested for holding up photographic images of aborted fetuses. I actually think they have a right to do that. I think we should all know what the consequence of an abortion is, and then respect the right of a woman to make that choice if she needs to. But I really object to those protesters who I disagree with being arrested and convicted for holding up factual images of what an abortion entails. It's also happened to me. In 1994, together with my colleagues from the LGBT human rights group Outrage, we staged a protest at Wembley Arena against Hizb ut-Tahrir, an extremist Islamist organisation that opposes democracy and human rights, and at the time was making profoundly abusive remarks about Hindus and Jews, and was saying that gay people, women who have sex outside of marriage, and Muslims who turn away from the faith should be executed. We were protesting against these extreme views. We held up placards that merely stated what they were saying. And we were arrested on the grounds that our placards were likely to cause alarm or distress to members of the public. Not the people who were saying it. They were free to carry on their outrageous, abusive, threatening and menacing claim. Now, of course, under the Public Order Act, any behaviour that is likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress is unlawful. Any signs that are likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress are unlawful. Any speech that is likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress is unlawful. Now, I agree that harassment is wrong, but alarm and distress? I mean, lots of things that lots of people say may well cause alarm and distress to some very sensitive people, such as the photos of aborted fetuses. But I don't think that is a legitimate reason to deny people freedom of expression. Religious people in particular are especially sensitive and often use these laws to suppress legitimate criticism. You've heard mention that I went into Canterbury Cathedral with my outraged colleagues in 1998. We did not interrupt the sacred parts of the service. We waited until the Archbishop began to speak, then we calmly walked into the pulpit, and I criticised the fact that Dr. George Carey, the then Archbishop, was saying that the law of the land should deny equal rights to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. We did not insult the Christian faith or the Archbishop personally. It was a brief, peaceful protest. We were arrested under the public order laws, although eventually the charge was changed to, quote, indecent behaviour in a church under the 1860 Ecclesiastical Courts Jurisdiction Act, formerly part of the Brawling Act of 1551. And under that law, any kind of protest in a church, no matter how brief, peaceful or polite, is unlawful. There's also been many other cases. Under the public order laws, an Oxford student was arrested for joking that a police officer's horse was gay. A young man was arrested for holding up a sign outside Scientology headquarters saying it was a dangerous cult. These abuses are happening, and they are very, very dangerous. There's also another particular law called behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace. Not behaviour that has caused a breach of the peace, but likely to cause a breach of the peace, and it's based on the subjective judgment of an individual police officer. If he thinks that your behaviour might cause a breach of the peace, even if you're acting entirely lawfully and non-violently, he can arrest, charge, and get you convicted. In other words, you can be convicted not for what you've done, but for a hypothetical scenario about what others might do in reaction to you. So, for example, in the 1990s, when we had all these anti-gay laws, every year, Outrage used to go and stand in Parliament Square during the state opening of Parliament and hold up placards calling for equality laws for gay people, an equal age of consent, the right to marry, an end to discrimination in employment. Every year we were arrested under behaviour likely to cause a breach of the peace. Not because we were doing anything wrong ourselves, but because the police claimed there were monarchists in the crowd who might be offended that we were there at the state opening of Parliament when the Queen was present. That's outrageous attack upon freedom of speech. Today, right now, we have before the government a proposal under the government's consultation on dealing with Islamist radicalisation. It's planning a whole new raft of repressive laws against free speech, particularly in universities. Now, I agree that religious fundamentalists of any hue should always be challenged and protested. But under the government's proposals, it's saying that extremists must be blocked from university campuses. And it's threatening universities with draconian penalties if they don't do that. But the government's definition of extremism reads, or the proposed definition is, vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. That's what it said. Or for starters, what are fundamental British values? There's no agreed definition. And there are no such thing as British values. There There are values that many of us share, but they're shared with people all over the world in many different countries. Moreover, the last bit says mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. Do we have to show mutual respect and tolerance for the BNP and the EDL, for white supremacists, for Islamo-fascists who say that gay people, unchaste women, and apostates and blasphemers should be killed? I don't believe that. But you can see how wide the government is seeking to draw the net. There's now a campaign to try and stop this, but who knows whether it will succeed. The very fact that it has been proposed is itself a mortal threat to our liberty. So in conclusion, I'd say we must defend liberty. We must defend freedom. But we don't do it by undermining it. We have to defend freedom in ways that are consistent with freedom and human rights for everyone. Thank you.